Well, hello, everyone. I'm Judy Halbert, and along with Linda, we co-lead the networks of inquiry in Indigenous education and the Transformational Educational Leadership Program at UBC. That's quite a mouthful, but I was a teacher, a principal, a district leader, worked at the ministry, kind of have done all kinds of things. And my big love is supporting teachers to get better at their practice and helping kids do better.
And I'm Linda Kaser, and I've taught every grade in the K-12 system except K, and I'm proud of that. And I've worked in teacher education, and I've done the same kinds of roles that Judy has mentioned. I've been an elementary and secondary principal and a district leader and a provincial leader. For a period of time, I was the writing lady in the province of British Columbia, so we used a networking approach to get better at writing, which worked really well. And I loved the inquiry process, I think, and I like it at all the levels. I'm particularly interested in the work right now with teachers, but also with students.
So Spirals of Inquiry is a collaborative approach for teachers to use together to change the experiences of kids. And it comes from two sources. One from case study evidence that Linda and I've had in working at that point about 10 years with schools across British Columbia, but also in partnership with Helen Timperley from the University of New Zealand, who was using a cycle of inquiry at that point. And we heard Helen speak at a conference, and she talked about the difference that was made between schools that just applied strategies and schools that applied strategies embedded in a spiral of inquiry or in a cycle of inquiry. And we knew then that we needed to work together. So we spent about 2 years working very closely with Helen to refine our ideas and to come up with the spiral of inquiry, which is a 6-stage approach to changing the experiences of learners.
And I think maybe I should just say that one of the best parts, I think, of the spiral is the first stage, which is scanning, because we insist that our approach to improvement or innovation always starts by listening to learners first in a disciplined way. And to do that, we got the strongest question in the social and emotional field from a researcher who's now at the University of Chicago, and a metacognitive question from the University of Auckland, and embedded that in the process. So we always start with interviewing young people, and that gives it an integrity, but it also gives it, we've had great sustainability with people who've worked with a spiral, and I think it's because you become addicted in a healthy way to talking with young people about their experiences rather than just looking at tables of numbers at the beginning.
So just building on that, the foundational principles of the spiral are being really clear on purpose. So we talk about hard goals, not smart goals, and really starting with that clarity of why we're trying to change things for learners that we serve. So that's number one. The second is around mindset, and we're really thinking about how do we create both that growth-oriented mindset and an inquiry mindset in the leaders of the process. And the third is around curiosity. So how do we embed curiosity at every stage in the process? We also draw on the OECD principles of learning as a basis for understanding what good learning looks like, as well as the First Peoples principles of learning, which is very important in a Canadian context to draw on the wisdom of our Indigenous colleagues. So the network is now 25 years old, almost 26 years old, which is amazing to us. It's probably one of the longest running educational networks led by volunteers that we know of. And it started initially with, in our province, there was the development of some very good formative assessment materials. We call them performance standards, think learning progressions in reading, writing, math problem solving, numeracy, and social responsibility. And Linda and I were invited to a meeting. We both had some provincial responsibilities and said, could you get teachers to voluntarily use these materials? Materials were terrific, but the one very smart person at our ministry knew that if they were just sent out in binders or here's the link to the website, nobody would do anything with it. So we just put out an invitation. We had $35,000 together to use. 34 schools showed up to a meeting. We said, okay, there's $1,000 for every school, and $1,000 left over to buy sandwiches. From that point, we learned the importance of acknowledging the work at the completion of a cycle. So the schools weren't incented for the money once they completed a cycle of inquiry and told their story publicly and in a written case study. Then we sent a thank you to them, and that's been really important. And we've maintained that for forever. By finding different funding sources just to say thank you to the schools. And then, that was going along quite well. But we then were contacted by a rural remote school and saying, why can't we be part of this? And we said, well, why not? So it went from being geographically located to being dispersed around the province. And then the next kind of iteration was an invitation to focus on Indigenous education. And that was a huge, well, it was an honor and it was a challenge. And the big question was, a lot of work is going on to improve the relationships and the outcomes for Indigenous kids, but it's all happening at a political level. It's not happening in the classroom. And so that was the start of the focus on Indigenous inquiry. And that's been fantastic. And we've seen we are the fastest improving jurisdiction in Canada in terms of quality of outcomes for Indigenous kids. And we're really proud of that work and are really passionate about it. So as I said before, the spiral includes 6 stages. So the big questions underpinning it is what's going on for our learners and how do we know? We've seen in school after school, every school that we've worked in, adults making assumptions about the experiences of learners, and we found it changes everything when we actually listen to the learners. So the first step in the spiral is scanning. And this is where we draw on all the assessment data that we've got, all of the important data within the school, and we listen to the learners. So Linda's mentioned previously, we start with 2 questions. The first question is, can every young person in the school name 2 adults who believe they'll be a success in life? And this comes from the work of Kim Schonert-Reichel. It's a really important diagnostic question around sense of belonging and also the repertoire that teachers use to convey that confidence in their learners. The follow-up question, so it's, can you name 2 adults in the building that believe you'll be a success in life? And if the young person says yes, then you say, who is that person and how do they show you? So we start to build the repertoire of strategies that teachers use. So that's question number 1. And of course, if we find a young person who can't answer that, and in every school so far, except for 1, we found that there are kids that sometimes we don't even expect who don't feel that sense of connection. And so we move to action immediately. We don't go through a whole spiral. But that's kind of the starting point. So what's going on for our learners? And are we listening to them? The second key question is to ask young people, what are you learning and why is it important? And this comes from the work of John Hattie and Helen Temperley, again, at the University of Auckland. And again, we've found that in most cases, in most classrooms, learners are pretty capable of saying what they're doing, but there's a big difference between what they're doing and what they're learning and understanding the purpose of their learning. So those questions give feedback to the teachers right away about, do kids feel a sense of belonging and do they have any ownership of their learning? So that's our starting point. And we can ask many other questions, but we insist that we start with those 2. The second stage is focus. So this is where, as a team of teachers, we need to decide where collectively, if we put our energy, are we going to make the biggest difference for our learners? So it may be on increasing a sense of belonging. It may be on mathematical problem solving. It might be on learner engagement. It might be persuasive writing, whatever it is. It may be reading for joy. Whatever it is that we decide, we also at that point say, what evidence are we going to use to show that we're making a difference? So we're both getting the focus and we're determining what outcomes we're going to be looking for. So that sounds fairly straightforward. We've got some evidence about what's going on. We've got a clear direction for where we want to go. And then the third stage is hunch. And this is where we say, as a profession, we actually have to grow up, because the big question at the hunch stage is, how are we, as the educators, contributing to this situation for our learners? So it requires some vulnerability, requires some courage, requires some honesty to really look at our own practices. And we can give you some examples of that, but that's missing that stage, is really a mistake, because it's so important.
Don't miss that stage, especially if you care about equity.
Yes, you can't miss any stage.
Trip you up.
Then the next stage is new learning. And this is where we say, all right, we've identified, let's say, mathematical problem solving is the area that we're going to focus on. Our hunch may say, we actually don't know enough about that. We don't give kids opportunity to solve problems. We're really interested in right and wrong answers too much, whatever it is. So now we're going to engage in some new learning, and that could be through, through textbooks. It could be through speakers. It could be through YouTube clips. It could be through finding a colleague in a school down the road that's doing a better job at that. But we're going to learn together. Then we're going to try some new things. So we're going to put new practice into action, and we're going to be very aware that things don't work well the first time. So we're going to persevere and persist and support each other in that new action stage. And then, and we've determined the length of time. It could be a term, it could be 6 weeks, it could be a year, whatever it is, but we've set the time at the focus stage, and then we're going to check. And checking is really where we say, are we making enough of a difference? And the key word there is enough. We're going to make some difference. Just because we're trying some new things. We'll make some difference for some kids, but are we making enough of a difference for a lot of kids? So that's the spiral, and then that takes us right back into scanning again.
Spirals of inquiry work now happens everywhere. It's very widely, the spirals widely used in British Columbia, and we have several school districts who've been using spirals thinking for the last decade, and they are wonderful districts to be in because they're really making positive difference both on the improvement side of things and also on the innovation side of things. If you think about some of the deeper learner pedagogies being more in the innovation space, these are leading edge districts now in the world, and when visitors come, that's where we take them. There's 10 countries around the world, sort of 18 jurisdictions. There's also work going on, because we did a Coursera MOOC, there's also work going on that we don't know about. It's just out there in ether space, but when we go to conferences, we run into people. The spiral has been used in a refugee camp to train secondary age students to help elementary age students. And the work was considered so powerful that people stayed in the camp so they could continue to have the education for these well-trained young people as teachers. I think more recently, we've been very excited to see some of our more experienced network spirals people use the spirals to help leadership groups of young people address really tough issues in their school, things like loneliness, the underachievement of some groups, but also they've done, some of these youth groups have done absolutely fabulous high impact work on reducing racism using the spiral, which has really just blown our mind. We've made a little video that's on our website about it, but it's just inspiring work to talk to these young people and see that they actually have been able to take some of these really tough issues and make their schools better in real time. So it's everywhere. It permeates our universe, so we're in touch with people. And Well, there's a great team in Sweden, for example. And they, by word of mouth, because almost all of this happens by word of mouth, the Swedish team is now helping a group in Finland. Apparently there's a big chunk of people in Finland who are actually Swedish speaking. And so there's this interesting networks. Earlier today, we were talking with a group in Ireland who also had some people from the Netherlands in the group. So that's how it moves around. But it tends to, if people use those first two questions well, they get hooked and stay with it. They, over a couple of years, they get very strong results.
The spirals of inquiry is for everyone, but particularly for teachers and principals and support staff, educators working in schools who want to change the experiences of their learners and are really committed to high equity and high quality. Those are the people that are attracted to this. But we've also found interest in groups outside of school as well, so whole school districts, but also community health programs, people working with mental health. There's a group in Wales that is the whole community around wellness is using the spiral of inquiry as their approach. So it has broader implications, but I think that the common thread that brings the people together in using the spiral is their curiosity and their commitment.
I think it's good for, like I would say that spirals of inquiry is for people who are willing to do things slightly differently than they've done before. So there's a mindset part of it. Having a bit of a growth mindset really helps. But I think it is important to say that now in our jurisdiction, British Columbia, it's a competency for principals and for district leaders to be curious. There's actually an inquiry competency in the set of 5 competencies that people are looking for. And to get to that place in our province, you have to have people who are willing to not be certain, but use the evidence and think about what young people are going to need in the future. And we have decided as a provincial learning community that curiosity is one of the things that young people really need to navigate in the newer world that they're facing.
Just building on that, I think that the spirals of inquiry is really good for challenging assumptions and taking us deeper. So I'll give a specific example. A school, an elementary school, observing that, around grade 5 and 6, there was heightened levels of anxiety. And they saw, kids kind of falling apart in ways that they hadn't seen before. And so they decided that what they needed to do was do more mindfulness, more, meditation to teach the kids some calming strategies and so on. So they had assumed that all they needed to do was teach the kids how to calm down and manage their emotions. When they used the spiral and asked the kids what was going on, they found out that the anxiety wasn't general, it wasn't universal, it was specifically related to assessment in mathematics, because the assessment in language arts was very different than math, and the kids now all of a sudden there was right and wrong and they were spinning out of control. So instead of focusing on mindfulness, they focused on assessment in mathematics. And they worked together, and they just did some terrific work. And over a couple of years, that school became a magnet for teachers wanting to learn about assessment in math. So you see the assumptions that they've made. If they hadn't challenged those assumptions, they could have, done some nice work, but wouldn't have changed fundamentally the roots of the anxiety, the school level anxiety that the kids were experiencing. So we've got tons of examples of that, but it's really, are you open to the uncertainty that comes when you really question your own practice and listen to what's going on for learners?
It works best when it works really well when the formal leader is an intellectually curious person. We can see that at a big system level in Australia. I don't know if you have system leader who values curiosity, who talks about curiosity, who talks to young people when they go into the building about what they're curious about, it becomes beautiful, and it really is easy then for system change. Well, much easier. It's always hard work, but it's much easier. That would be my big play. It's more difficult. You know, this is another question later on, but it's, if you are a formal leader who is extremely certain and you already have an answer, then inquiry mindedness is sometimes more difficult to develop. I think that we've seen, though, in North America, that the places that are certain often have not made the same kind of progress than the places that are curious. So we've got some good examples. And I think the other thing that the spirals is really good for as an approach is sustained effort over time, because it's interesting. And as people get more absorbed and as they get better at it, there's a learning effect the first time through. But as they get better at it, they take on more and deeper challenges. And we've really seen that with our Indigenous learning work, where at first it's, you know, let's try a book. And 2 or 3 years later, it's let's do a lot of our learning on the land. Let's work with elders in the community. Let's learn some of the local language. It's transformed, but they had to go through that beginning stage and then stay with it.
Well, I'll build on what Linda was just saying. The leadership is key. So the support of the formal leader, principal, vice principal, is really important. And then the challenge is trying to move too fast and think, well, we already have an idea about what we want to do, and let's kind of adapt the spiral to reinforce our own ideas already. So it's working on previous assumptions. Another challenge is skipping any of the stages. And so missing out the fact that actually this is about professional learning. So, you know, we get excited about our focus area and we leap right to action. So it's slowing down to make sure that there's integrity at every stage in the process. And it sounds deceptively simple. And we worked on that to keep the language quite clear. But underneath each of those stages, there's quite a bit of complexity. So I think it's moving too fast, not having the formal leaders involved and supportive, and not challenging our own assumptions.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think in systems that haven't yet learned to respect their informal teacher leaders to the degree that's necessary, because the spiral depends on those really smart teachers who've often been overlooked because they're quietly working away in their classroom or their program, and they know so much. Like and some of them are retired and still want to stay involved. So, you know, the smartest formal leaders in our system know how to work with their outstanding practitioners to co-lead the process. So it's not hierarchical, it's more networked, it's flatter.
We also say that this is not a, I mean, it's a process. We're describing it as a process, but when you work with over time, it becomes a professional way of life. That this is just, you know, and it's based on what good teachers and principals and support staff do naturally. I mean, this is a distillation of what the best do. And then it's saying, now can we all learn from this? Well, I'm going to say, take a look at some of the resources that are available freely. You know, we've got lots of resources on our website, including case studies of schools. So, you know, they're just ordinary public schools that are willing to share their stories. So take a look at what they've done. Take a look at some of the resources. Maybe read the handbook. Don't just think that because you've seen the slide with the stages that that's enough to get you going. However, having said that, I'd say if you don't do anything else to get started, is just to ask those two key questions
Yeah.
of learners, and then you're off to the races. I mean, once you hear directly from young people, it's pretty hard to ignore it. So
I think the other advice I would give is, we have an annual symposium. It's usually between 250 and 300 people. And a really great way, I think, to get started is just talk to a teacher who's already been using the process, or talk to a school. Because, as educators, we're bombarded with so many competing approaches, and, there's lots of salespeople around too. We've learned from Indigenous people that, you should give as much as possible away. So I think that there's lots and lots of teachers now who are willing to talk to somebody else. There's a wonderful gifted teacher in Barcelona who's retiring this year, and her name is Begonia. And if you talk to Begonia for 2 minutes, you want to follow her thinking, because she's just so deep and so wise, and so generous. So I think make a friend of an inquiry person. This is the best way to get started.
And I think, find a friend who's willing to dig into this with you. What we found, and originally where we started the network is we were working provincially, Linda and I, and we were in a lot of schools, and we saw really great practice in every school, but it wasn't linked, and those people didn't know each other. And often those really cutting edge teachers are lonely. And we wanted to create a space where they could learn from each other and not be so alone. So find a friend and get started.